Imagine waking up to zero in your bank account, every penny gone, transferred overseas, and your own child celebrating it in Rome. But what they didn't see was her patience turning to power. This is the true story of a silent mother's revenge. My son emptied my savings and took his wife and her mother on a grand European trip. But behind that opulence, she was weaving a storm they never saw coming. Undercover CEO, family betrayals, silent justice. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll see that sometimes the loudest comeback is the one whispered in calm. My son emptied my bank account and took his wife and her mother to Rome. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I smiled, and 3 days later, he called me sobbing. "Mom, what did you do?" That's when he learned silence is a mother's sharpest blade. Ellie Price never imagined betrayal could feel so quiet, not like a gunshot, not like glass breaking. No, betrayal is more like a slow leak, silent, invisible, until the floor beneath your feet suddenly collapses. And the day it happened, she wasn't screaming. She was simply sitting in her old faded armchair, the one she bought when her son Jackson turned 7. Paid in full with her first honest paycheck from scrubbing toilets in Hollywood Hills mansions. It started with a ping, a soft, harmless buzz from her cell phone, the screen lighting up with a notification she almost ignored. Available balance, 0.0s. She blinked, once, twice, read it again, then again. Her fingers, still strong from years of work, hovered over the screen like it might burn her. She tried to call the bank, first a robotic voice, then a young woman on the other end, too cheery, too detached. "Yes, ma'am. Your account has had multiple online wire transfers over the last 48 hours, all authorized under your credentials. Do you want to file a fraud report?" The voice might as well have been underwater. Ellie's world had slowed to a crawl. Who received the money?" she asked, though part of her already knew. There's a kind of ache that only mothers feel when they know their child has betrayed them, but they still need to hear it confirmed. All funds were transferred to a joint account under the name Jackson Arthur Price. Her son. Her only son. She hung up without answering. No fraud report, no tears, no outburst, just silence. Outside, the world spun as usual. Somewhere, kids laughed. The ice cream truck sang its merry song, but inside Ellie's chest, the knot had already started tightening, the kind that forms when the soul understands something the heart refuses to accept. That night, the air inside her tiny house in South Central Los Angeles felt heavier, staler, as if even the walls had heard what happened. She moved through her kitchen in a daze. Every cupboard, every framed photo of Jackson as a child, every birthday card she had ever kept in a tin box, all of it seemed to blur together. And then the landline rang. Ellie, honey, did you see Jackson's Instagram?" It was Doris, her neighbor and longtime friend, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Girl, he's in Rome. Rome, Italy. Fancy food, champagne. His wife and her mama look like royalty." Rome. Champagne. Ellie's hands trembled, not from age, but from truth. She didn't need Instagram to believe it, but she opened the drawer, pulled out her old phone anyway. She wasn't one for social media. She barely knew how to open the app, but she had always followed Jackson's account, quietly, like a shadow. And there it was, a perfect photo. Jackson, her baby, in a white shirt, raising a glass beside Tanya, his wife, and Rhonda, the mother-in-law who never looked Ellie in the eye. Rome, my new beginning. I deserve this. In the comments, Tanya had written, "Good things come to those who wait. Thanks for everything, mama-in-law." Ellie stood there for a long time, phone in hand, still, frozen. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. Instead, she smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile she wore in photos. It was the kind that happens when something inside you dies, and something else wakes up in its place. A week earlier, she had brought Jackson his favorite meal, her fried chicken, collard greens, cornbread from scratch. She waited at the gate outside his apartment complex for 2 hours, sitting on a bench with the tray on her lap. No one answered the buzzer. When the doorman finally approached, he said, "Ma'am, I was instructed not to let you in." She asked, "Why?" "They didn't say. Just that you shouldn't visit unannounced." She walked home that day, didn't even take the bus. The summer heat clung to her skin. Every step felt heavier than the last, but still, no tears. That night, Doris brought pecan pie. "You've always been strong, Ellie. Don't let this break you." Ellie stared into her tea. "Do you think children ever regret it?" "Doris?" "Yes, honey, but sometimes they realize it too late." Ellie nodded, quiet, measured. "Then I hope it's not too late when he realizes what he lost." Doris looked puzzled. "What are you going to do, Ellie?" Ellie smiled that same strange smile again. "I'm going to do what they never expected me to do. I'm going to smile in silence. Because a woman with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous kind of woman there is." The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Ellie's modest kitchen window, casting a golden glow on the old tile floor that hadn't been replaced in over 3 decades. She stood barefoot, her toes curling slightly against the cold linoleum, holding a lukewarm mug of coffee that had long since lost its steam. Her eyes were vacant, fixed on the cheap smartphone lying on the table. It buzzed again, the screen flashing with a new notification. She didn't want to look, but she did. The name on the screen wasn't saved, but she knew the number. It was Doris, her neighbor from across the street, the one who always spoke a little too loud, always knew a little too much, and had a habit of sharing news that no one asked for. She picked up. "Ellie, honey, you seen Jackson's Instagram? Lord have mercy, child, you better sit down." Ellie didn't sit. She didn't speak either. Just held the phone between her ear and shoulder and opened the app she barely knew how to use. Jackson had helped her install it once, years ago when he still visited, when he still laughed with her and called her mama without that distant performative tone. The app loaded slowly. Her Wi-Fi was temperamental, much like her joints these days. But when it finally opened, the image staring back at her nearly made her drop the mug from her hand. There he was. Her son, her Jackson, smiling like the world was perfect, like he hadn't just drained every dollar she'd saved since she was 22 years old. He wore a white linen shirt, the kind she always wanted to buy him but never could afford when he was little. His arm was around Tanya, and on the other side was Rhonda, the woman who never once returned Ellie's smile. Behind them stood the Colosseum, basking in a soft Roman dusk. The caption read, "Rome, my new beginning. I deserve this." Ellie stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat. Not from shock, not anymore, but from the sharpness of realization. She zoomed in with shaking fingers. Tanya's hand was resting on Jackson's chest, her nails painted blood red. Her lips were curled in that subtle smirk that always made Ellie feel small. She scrolled to the next post, a boomerang of a wine glass clinking against another. Tanya's caption, "Good things come to those who wait. Thanks for everything, Mama-in-law." Ellie laughed, a single breathless laugh that sounded more like a cough. Her coffee went cold in her hand. She set the mug down, walked slowly to her bedroom, opened the drawer beneath her worn-out socks, pulled out an old phone, the one with cracks in the corner and a faded sticker of a butterfly that Jackson had put there when he was 8. She opened the gallery. There were only a few photos. Jackson in middle school, Jackson with braces, Jackson on the day he graduated college, the day she sold her last piece of family land so he could pay his final tuition. Her heart clenched at that one. And then, back to the present. Rome. A world she'd never see, bought with the life she had given up. The betrayal wasn't in the money. It was in the smile. That smile he gave the camera, free and proud, while she had sat in an empty kitchen thinking maybe, just maybe, this was all a mistake. It wasn't. Her fingers tapped the screen again, slowly this time. Back to Instagram, back to the photo. She stared longer now. She counted the plates on the table in the background, counted the wine bottles, counted the lives moving forward without her. In that moment, Ellie didn't feel 68. She felt infinite, as if every version of herself, young Ellie scrubbing bathrooms, pregnant Ellie walking home with swollen ankles, mother Ellie packing school lunches with pennies, were standing beside her, watching, judging, urging. She stood, walked to the window. The neighborhood was loud as ever, kids yelling down the street, a dog barking, car tires screeching around the corner, but inside her house, there was only silence. She whispered to no one. He used my life to buy theirs. And just like that, the grief didn't feel like drowning anymore. It felt like fuel. Somewhere in Rome, Jackson was raising a toast. Tanya was laughing too loud. Rhonda was picking at a plate of olives she wouldn't finish. And none of them knew that across the ocean, in a small house in South Central LA, the woman they erased had just begun to rewrite the ending. Ellie reached for a pen and started taking notes. Ellie sat back down at her kitchen table, the phone's warm plastic still pressed to her ear, though Doris had hung up long ago. Her eyes felt hot, her cheeks sting. But she did not cry. She listened to the silence, as if the walls themselves had something to say. On the counter lay the cracked screen of her older phone, photos fading faintly. She touched them gently, as one does with fragile memories. A child's birthday cake, Jackson's first bicycle, her wedding photo, though the man she married left long ago. Each held a weight, a cost. She closed her eyes and inhaled, letting that sharp odor of betrayal mingle with the faint scent of burnt toast. The breath settled somewhere cold in her chest. She whispered, "There are hidden threads here, threads I must follow." That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. She paced her small house, the floorboards creaking like distant whispers. She passed framed photos, kitchen utensils, her donated furniture, all pieces of the life she'd built, piece by piece. Every step felt heavier now, because each step carried the weight of what had been taken. She sat in her recliner, pulled her shawl tighter, and reached out for something she rarely touched now, a centuries-old notebook with yellowed pages. In pen, she had scribbled recipes, bits of prayer, names of people she trusted. Tonight, she flipped to a blank page. She wrote, "He thinks he's in Rome enjoying what he stole. He doesn't know how carefully I observe." She stared at those words. They felt like a promise, a vow. She closed the book, tucked it into her lap, and sat in the dim glow of her kitchen lamp until exhaustion overtook her. The next morning, Ellie moved with purpose. She dressed in comfortable yet neat clothes, faded brown sweater, simple slacks. She tied her hair back, not for vanity, but for clarity. Today she would begin the chase. First, she called Walter, her childhood friend turned lawyer, although neither now spoke of childhood. Walter's voice over the phone cracked with concern. "Ellie, do you understand what you're setting into motion?" She said plainly, "I understand more than they think I do." He agreed to come by that afternoon. She hung up and stared out the window. The street was already alive with movement, neighbors, vendors, children going to school. The world carried on, indifferent to one mother's desperation. By noon, Walter arrived carrying a leather briefcase, gray at the edges, worn with years of memories. He sat with her in the living room. Ellie offered tea. Walter accepted, his fingers brushing hers as he took the cup. He opened his case, revealing stacks of printed bank records, forged documents, signatures she barely recognized. He slid them across the coffee table. "Look," he said, "I checked. Jackson and Tanya have been moving money for months, wiring it slowly overseas. The transfers you didn't authorize. They forged your signature for a joint line of credit. They even tried moving title documents for your home under Jackson's name." Ellie stared. A lifetime of denial shifted in that moment. She saw not just her son's betrayal, but the calculated cruelty of people she once welcomed into her life. Her breath caught. Walter continued, "You have leverage, elder financial abuse, fraud, asset freeze. We can file now, but it has to be careful, quiet. You can't act in panic. They'll defend aggressively." She nodded. She already knew they would. Her silence had to become her strength. They spent hours poring over documents together. Ellie's hands hovered over signatures. She traced her original signature in that old notebook, the shaky, uncertain line of a woman who never believed she could matter. Walter matched it to the forged version. Similar, but mechanical, cold. Ellie saw it clearly. Her name used as a mask. Her identity twisted to erase her. They plotted. Walter would submit a provisional freeze to the financial system. He'd file complaints. He'd request oversight. He'd set legal wheels in motion that her son wouldn't even sense until it was too late. When Walter left, Ellie didn't follow the usual path to her bedroom. She went into her small home office, a closet turned into file corner. She pulled old bank statements, canceled stamps, envelopes with menial checks she wrote years ago. She stacked them with the documents Walter left. She began scrawling a timeline. Date, amount, suspicious transfer, note, no authorization. Hours passed. The afternoon light waned. She grew cold, but she did not stop. She paused only to listen. From the street came children's laughter, a passing car, the hum of life. Invisible to most, it was her moment of calm before the storm. That evening, Jackson posted another photo. Rooftop dinner, wine date. He tagged Tanya, Rhonda, and used a heart emoji. Ellie saw it on her older phone, the one she carried just for emergencies. She didn't react. She only noted the timestamp. She prepared a small dinner for herself. Boiled greens, a slice of cornbread. She ate quietly. She didn't think of Jackson. She thought of justice. Before bed, she returned to the notebook. On a fresh page, she wrote, "They have part of my life. They don't have the rest. Silence is my witness. My next step will speak louder than words." She closed the notebook, locked it in her drawer, and for the first time in days, she prayed. Not for forgiveness, but for clarity. Sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's formulating the strike. She lay down. The ceiling fan moved slowly. The air felt charged. She drifted into fitful sleep, mind racing, strategy forming. As Ellie slept in South Central in a distant hotel suite, Jackson's eyelids fluttered. Dreams of money, power, illusion, realities shifting in Rome, unbeknownst to him. The chase had begun. She would not wait forever. And when she acted, there would be no escape. Ellie woke early the next morning before dawn broke. The house was quiet, apart from the hum of a distant car and the soft creak of settling walls. She sat at the edge of her bed, her notebook open on her lap. Her pen hovered, steady. She placed her hand over the page, breathing in the stale air of the room she had slept in for decades. Floorboards old, wallpaper faded, memories stacked in corners. This was not the same woman who lay there yesterday. She felt that shift in her bones, an awakening. She rose and walked to the kitchen. The kettle hissed. She measured tea leaves with deliberate care, letting the steam fill her senses. Her joints ached, years of toil, but her spirit felt electrified. She drank the tea slowly, tasting determination in every sip. She sat back at her makeshift office, an old desk by the window, ledgers, printouts, and the red notebook of her vows beside her. She flipped to the page where she had written, "Silence is my witness. My next step will speak louder than words." She drew lines under it. She reviewed the documents Walter had given her. Fraudulent transfers, forged signatures, suspicious joint accounts, each line a wound inflicted upon her life. But now each also became a clue, an opening. Ellie drafted an email to Brenda, the retired accountant neighbor who had already helped her decipher financial statements. She asked her to come over at noon. She hoped Brenda would bring her analytical mind, the one she used for teaching neighborhood kids sums and ledgers. Morning blurred into noon. When Brenda arrived, Ellie greeted her with a steady gaze. Together, they spread documents across the kitchen table. Light filtered through the curtains, illuminating faded edges of old checks, money orders, bank statements. Brenda leaned in. They didn't just take money. They tried to rewrite your life papers. She pointed at a side document, a draft will in Ellie's name that left everything to Jackson. The signature was almost hers, but not exactly. Ellie exhaled as though releasing a held breath. So they attempted to legalize their theft. Yes, Brenda said softly. If they filed this, you'd lose everything. The house, savings, property. You'd wake up humanless. Ellie nodded. But they made a mistake. They left threads. They underestimated me. Brenda's eyes softened. You know this system. You know how to dig. Let me help you dig. They worked. For hours. Ellie dictating, Brenda typing, indexing, cross-referencing, document by document. Money moved on June 12th. Forged will dated May. Signature mismatch. Joint account created March. Ellie's name as guarantor on mortgage in April. The scale of betrayal stunned them both. But clarity is strength. That night, Ellie called Walter. She sent photos of the documents and laid out next steps. File complaint, request asset freeze, prepare litigation. Walter listened, then paused. Ellie, you need power behind you. Public pressure, media. We do this quietly, but we don't do it invisibly forever. Ellie felt that truth too. Revenge in silence is powerful, but visibility grants leverage. She asked Walter to prepare a press release draft, one that frames her story as elder abuse by a child, a betrayal of trust. He balked for a moment, worried about risk. She said, "Let them see, but on my terms." Meanwhile, Jackson's Rome posts multiplied. Restaurants, wine, laughing faces. A world she had funded flaunted in her face. Ellie watched them. Each new photo was a nail in his facade. But she didn't respond publicly. She kept her calm. One evening, she visited her old church, a simple brick building behind her block. The doors were open. She walked in, stood before the altar. She spoke no prayer. She only closed her eyes and whispered, "Give me patience. Give me strategy. Not for revenge, but for justice." The silence in that sacred space felt heavier than any courtroom. When she returned home, she found an envelope stuck under the door. No return address. She picked it up gently as one handles sharp things. Inside, copies of postings from a finance board overseas referencing transfers tied to Jackson's name. Someone had tipped her. Someone was watching. She tucked the envelope into her red notebook. It wasn't a gift. It was a signal. The world was waking, and she stood in its center, ready. Days later, she moved. She visited the local public records office under the guise of checking property taxes. She requested documents under her name, some flagged, some hidden. She quietly paid a clerk under the counter to scan her anything suspicious. She photographed deeds, titles, signatures. She located attempts, aborted filings, unrecorded changes. One afternoon, she saw a junior clerk glance at her over the counter. It unnerved her for a moment, but she met the gaze with calm and nodded. She told herself, every step is a message. She belonged. She mattered. At the end of the week, Brenda came over. On the table, an outline of a blank media statement, a fully redacted complaint form, notarized affidavits, draft lawsuits. Ellie looked over it all, her bones tired, her heart strong. She asked Brenda to stay the night because she needed someone with her. Brenda agreed without hesitation. They sat in that living room long past midnight, sipping peppermint tea, lights low. Ellie spoke quietly. When the world sees them, they must see the betrayal, with me as witness. Brenda held her hand. You are the witness. Ellie nodded. She climbed into bed, the notebook clutched to her chest. She stared at the ceiling, the pattern of paint cracks familiar. Tomorrow would be the start. The the beginning of the war she had kept secret until now. She closed her eyes. Sleep came unevenly, but sleep came. In Rome, Jackson raised a glass, unaware that far away someone was turning the tide, unaware that the next morning the world would hear about what mothers endure and what they can fight back. Morning came slow, gray, heavy. Ellie awoke with resolve. The notebook she kept beside her bed lay open to the last equation she'd written the night before. Freeze accounts. Expose truth. Activate complaint. She pressed her hand on it as though feeling its weight. She dressed methodically, not frantically. A modest blouse, clean slacks, no jewelry, no flourish. She carried a folder containing legal documents and copies of transactions. Walter would come at midday. By mid-morning, she made her first official move. She went to her local bank branch, not the one she used for decades, but another branch, one where she was less known. She presented identification and requested copies of internal logs. She asked politely but firmly, "I request a full trace of account movement over the last 6 months, including interbank transfers." The clerk asked why. She said she suspected financial abuse. The clerk hesitated. Ellie showed the forged documents she and Walter had found. Concern flickered in the clerk's eyes. The request would proceed with supervision. In the waiting area, Ellie watched her reflection in the glass. It was a woman older, yes, but not defeated. Something in her posture had changed. Her spine straightened. Her jaw tightened. She was no longer invisible. Next, she met Brenda in the kitchen. Brenda, her faithful neighbor, brought her laptop, spreadsheets, and analysis. They cross-referenced bank records with public property filings. Ellie's name had been manipulated in multiple documents. A house transfer attempted, a joint account opened, some signatures off by millimeters. The magnitude of the deceit revealed itself. When Walter arrived, they gathered in her living room. He brought a stack of affidavits, provisional freeze orders, draft press statements. Ellie watched him prepare. The plan: file a constrained legal complaint, ask a court for asset freeze, submit documents for potential elder abuse case, and prepare to leak a clean, controlled narrative to the media. She would not be the victim who screams. She would be the truth that hits like a hurricane. Ellie's heart pounded when they considered going public. The press would pounce. Jackson and Tanya would counterattack. But Walter reminded her, public perception will create pressure, not for vengeance, but for justice. Late afternoon, Ellie sat on her porch. She watched the block she knew so well. Kids playing, neighbors chatting, someone walking a dog. Normal life carried on. She clutched the folder on her lap as though holding fragile eggs. In those moments, she reflected, betrayal had been quiet, but her response would also be measured. That evening, Jackson posted a new photo. He wore a tailored suit standing beneath Roman columns. A caption, "Business trip turned dream escape. Thank you, life." Tiny comments scrolled beneath. Ellie viewed it. Did she feel pride? No. She felt resolve. Brenda stayed that night again. Ellie lined up her documents on the table. She traced lines, highlighted oddities. She would deliver these tomorrow morning to the court. She also sent secure copies to trusted media contacts using anonymizing services. The world should see a mother's voice, not noise. The next morning, she dressed in her court outfit. Simple teal cardigan, gray skirt. She arrived early at the courthouse. In the clerk's office, she submitted her paperwork, the fraud complaint, the elder abuse claim, the asset freeze petition. The clerk accepted them. Ellie's signature on the complaint trembled slightly, but the moment it was lodged, the lines shifted. The process had begun. At midday, she met Walter and Brenda in a small cafe across the street. Under whispered tones, they reviewed next steps: legal motions, press statement release, timing of freezing accounts. Ellie added one caveat: no name dropping. This is not revenge. It is a reclamation. As they parted, Ellie stepped outside. She made one phone call to Doris. She asked her neighbor to go online and post one line. What happens when a mother is erased? It wasn't defamatory. It planted curiosity. Back home, Ellie waited. Dinner cooked, but untouched. She drifted through memories, little Jackson clutching her hand, his laughter echoing. Her arms weary from work, she looked at the calendar and counted how many days she had been silent. 6 months? A lifetime? She whispered to herself, "You asked for this silence. Now you own it." That night, Walter called. "Ellie, the preliminary hearing is set in 2 days. The judge granted freeze on certain accounts, but he needs your testimony." Ellie inhaled the weight of it. She accepted. She wrote in her red notebook late, "Today we began the dance. The shadows are moving. They don't see me yet, but tomorrow, by the light of law, they will." She closed it, turned off lights, and slept with purpose. In Rome, Jackson opened his phone. A new email, legal inquiry from U.S. court. He froze mid-scroll. Tanya looked over his shoulder. He didn't know what storm was coming, but he sensed its first thunder. Dawn tiptoed into Ellie's kitchen with fragile light. She stirred oatmeal slowly, eaten cold, the simplest meal. Her mind ran through the timeline of her own betrayal, the transfers, the forged will, the documents she unearthed. Each step had been careful, deliberate. She stayed silent, studied the shadow edges, and only now prepared for the moment of exposure. She dressed in muted colors, charcoal sweater, black slacks, no jewelry. She brushed her graying hair into a neat bun. She carried only her red notebook and her phone. Today would test everything. She arrived at the U.S. Embassy's financial liaison office before noon. The building was quiet, secure, formal. Ellie passed the metal detectors without fanfare, carried her documents in a fold-over folder. On the desk, she presented her case, the freeze orders already granted, the complaint filed, the international money transfers. She asked for cooperation between U.S. banking authorities and Italian financial institutions. Across the world, in Rome, Jackson wrapped his suit jacket over his shoulders. He glanced at his phone. A bank notification blinked. Account frozen due to suspicious activity. He frowned, tapped the screen. Declined popped up when he tried to pay for a taxi ride. He stared. His world shifted under his feet. Tanya, waiting beside him in designer heels, looked at his face. "What's wrong?" she asked, forced calm. He ignored her, opened email. His brow creased. She reached to touch his arm. He shook off the gesture. Rhonda, always observant, watched silently. Her face, once confident, now hung tight with tension. The glamorous trip crumbled fast in the rose-colored filter they had posted online. Jackson stumbled, tried withdrawing money, used credit card. Nothing worked. The reply messages pinged, account compromised, access denied, call your bank. His name, once tied to money and images of luxury, now linked to fraud and international investigations. Back in Los Angeles, Ellie interviewed with financial agents. She sat across a table, hands still, silence her weapon. For every question they asked, dates, amounts, forged signatures, she responded with factual clarity. She produced her red notebook showing page-by-page logs. She revealed how Brenda had cross-checked records, how Walter had prepared the complaint, how she carried every piece of evidence herself. She did not cry. She did not break. She spoke quietly. Measured. He stole from his mother to fuel his fantasy, but fantasy has to bow to truth. Within hours, news of Jackson's frozen accounts reached social media. Stories titled, "Scandal in Rome, Local Man's U.S. Assets." Frozen surfaced. Tanya's Instagram posts deleted. Rhonda's comments vanished. The narrative flipped. In Rome, Jackson and Tanya raced through the streets, luggage in hand. They tried calling bank support, diplomatic contacts, but every call ended in rejection or automated replies. He tapped his forehead, muttering, "What did she do? What did she do?" Tanya's composure cracked first. "Why didn't you tell me?" she hissed. Jackson froze, mouth open but no words. His empire of illusion was collapsing, and she had been complicit. Rhonda, furious, barked at Jackson. "You built this on stolen dollars. I don't want to be dragged down with you." She stormed off into the night. Jackson stood there, stunned, alone on the Roman cobblestones, luxury gone, phone in hand. The cherry blossoms of betrayal rained down on him. In Los Angeles, Ellie returned home under quiet dusk. The world outside went on, vendors selling fruit, children laughing in the streets, streetlights flickering. She entered her living room, placed the red notebook on the table, sat, and closed her eyes. She remembered Jackson's toddler curls, his lopsided grin, his whispered, "I love you, Mama." She remembered the nights she worked 3 cleaning jobs so he could eat. She remembered the land she sold, the ring she pawned, every sacrifice, every hope. All disappeared, until now. She opened her eyes. Her silence had begun to speak. She smiled, soft, resolute, later. Her phone buzzed, Jackson calling. She pressed accept. He stumbled. His voice cracked. "Mom, what have you done? Why can't I access my money?" She remained calm. Without emotion, she replied, "I didn't take from you, son. I stopped you from taking from me." The line went silent. She hung up. Above her, near the ceiling fan, the brood of dust motes rotated. The night air felt lighter. Ellie closed the notebook and turned off the lights. She walked to her window and looked out at her neighborhood. She thought of every corner, every faded wall, every sound she knew by heart, and she whispered to the wind, "The tower has begun to fall." Ellie awoke just before dawn. The sky outside her window lay in hues of bruised purple and silver. She felt the weight of what had transpired the day before. The freeze notices, Jackson's shock, the crumbling facade in Rome. But she also felt something else. Lightness. The first relief she'd known in weeks. She dressed in soft clothes and stepped outside onto her porch, clutching her red notebook like a talisman. The street was quiet. One neighbor's television murmured, dogs slept, and the morning air tasted of possibility. She sipped water and reviewed in her mind the path ahead. She had started the war, but now she needed to shape the peace. Revenge was not enough. She needed redemption. For herself, for the life she'd built, maybe even for Jackson, if he was willing to face it. By mid-morning, she called a small community radio station in LA through a pseudonym. She asked them to run a short segment. When a mother's faith is drained, her truth becomes her voice. It aired midday. She listened quietly at home. Responses trickled in, calls from women who had been used, abandoned, betrayed. She didn't identify herself. She didn't respond. But she listened. Meanwhile, Jackson in Rome was in limbo. With accounts frozen, credit lines blocked, and Tanya abandoned, he waited at the U.S. Embassy. The weight of humiliation pressed on him. He roamed the gray halls, watched diplomats speak coldly, felt his name filed among fraud cases. He confronted Tanya. "Why didn't you tell me?" She had no answer, just hollow excuses. She left him again, this time for good. Back home, Ellie continued her strategy. She met with Walter in his law office. They refined the lawsuit. They decided to donate part of the legal damages to a nonprofit for elder women financially abused. That would frame her battle not as revenge, but as justice. She wanted the story to shift from victim to warrior. Ellie also visited clergy from her church. She asked them to pray for her strength and for the healing of broken souls, not to curse Jackson, but to lift him from his delusions. The pastor agreed. A Sunday service was arranged to address silent abuse and economic betrayal among families. Ellie attended anonymously, sitting at the back, her heart pounding as others spoke of invisible wounds. At home, she expanded her red notebook. One section, financial records. Another, letters unsent to Jackson. A third, her reflections. She penned a draft letter to Jackson, but stopped writing it. She realized the letter could be used by him as ammo. She would release it when the truth needed to be told, not when she felt hurt. One evening, she heard footsteps outside her window. She looked out and saw a teenage neighbor, Maria, holding a small potted plant. She came over the fence. "Ms. Price, I saw your story on the radio," Maria said softly. "I'm so sorry you're going through this." Ellie's throat tightened. She thanked her. Maria said, "You taught me that silence doesn't always mean weakness." Maria left. Ellie touched the soil of the pot she received. Sometimes connection heals more than confrontation. Weeks passed. Jackson boarded a flight back to the U.S. He had no home, no money, no status. The last email he had received was a subpoena. The immigration rules flagged his name. The press was waiting. He landed quietly. No fanfare, no welcome. At the airport, Ellie's health had worsened, the cancer spreading. Walter and Brenda met her as she walked off the curb, cane in hand. She entered the terminal. Jackson was there, seated in a corner. She took a deep breath and walked toward him, her steps slow but deliberate. The world watched. He looked up. She saw his shock. She saw regret. She saw the distance he had tried to bury but never could. She carried the red notebook. She offered it to him. He rose, weak. She gave him no hug. She gave him her gaze. "Jackson," she said, voice steadier than he expected, "this is not what I wished for you, but you forced my hand." She paused. "I didn't raise a man to take from me. I raised one to stand with me. You have a choice." She held out the notebook and truth. He took it. His hands shook. The photos, the amounts, the records, the letters unsent. Tears glistened in his eyes. He whispered, "Mom," but got no further. Tanya and Rhonda stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. She turned away. "They will hear our story," she said, "not as a spectacle, but as a warning." Before leaving, she told Jackson, "I forgive you, maybe not fully yet, but I forgive you enough to let truth stand." Then she walked away, cane steady, steps firm. Jackson collapsed to his knees. He buried his face in the carpet of that terminal. The whispers around him were hushed. The cameras clicked. The world watched a man stripped bare before his mother. That night, Ellie returned to her home. She lay in bed feeling weak but alive. She opened the red notebook to write a final entry. "They took, I reclaimed. He lost power, I found mine. Redemption is never free. It is earned, defended, and given forward." She closed her eyes, whispered a prayer, and slept. Quiet with purpose sealed. Ellie arrived early at the embassy's secure vestibule. Her heart steady but charged. She carried a slim folder in one hand and the red notebook in the other, each weight heavier than any suitcase Jackson might have carried. Behind tinted glass doors, Jackson waited. Tanya and Rhonda hovered by his side, faces tight, composure brittle. She walked in slowly, every step measured, the corridors echoing with hushed voices and formal footsteps. Security cleared her without comment. She passed staff in crisp suits, cameras aimed discreetly, the building humming with formality. She felt the tension beneath every floor tile. When she entered the white, sterile room, Jackson stood. He looked different. Haggard, gaunt, hollowed. No tailored shirts, no confident posture, no polished edge. Ellie's pulse clicked once. She walked toward him, the room strangely silent. "Jackson," she said softly but clearly. He swallowed, eyes flicked. Tanya's lips tightened, Rhonda's expression morose. He tried to speak. His voice cracked. "Mom, why are you here?" She raised the folder. Because this moment was inevitable. She placed it on the table. Photos, bank records, signature comparisons, all laid bare for him to see. She opened the red notebook beside it. "These are pieces of your story I've kept. Today you own them too." Tears filled his eyes. He reached forward. She withdrew. "Respect, Jackson, not pity." She gestured to the documents. "These show the transfers, the forgery, the draft will, the freeze order, the investigations. Everything you built on lies is now laid before you." He dropped his eyes. Tanya stepped forward, voice sharp. You came all the way from LA to humiliate us? Ellie looked at her. I came to present truth. Rhonda sneered. They'll arrest him? Ellie's voice rose with firm calm. No, he's not here to be arrested by me. He's here to face what he did. The embassy, the courts, the law, they will act. I will bear witness. The embassy official entered. Expression neutral, clipboard in hand. We've reviewed the complaint. Mr. Jackson Price, you are required to sign documents acknowledging fraudulent actions and restitution plans. You have the right to legal counsel. Jackson's shoulders slumped. He looked at his mother, broken, pained, resolute. Mom, I'm sorry. Ellie's eyes softened but did not leak emotion. I forgive you, Jackson, but forgiveness does not erase consequence. He signed. The weight of it hammered him. Tanya cried in frustration. Rhonda stared away. Ellie watched with cold grace. The official said, This concludes the session. We will publish a summary to public record. Cameras clicked. Jackson held the red notebook, leafing through pages. He looked at old photos. His childhood, her sacrifices past, the letter unsent. Ellie turned to walk away. Before she left, she paused and said, You were meant to carry my legacy, not destroy it. She left silence behind her. In the corridor, reporters clamored beyond glass walls. Phones flashed. Security escorted Ellie out. Jackson followed. He walked toward her, trembling. She stepped inside the embassy exit. Cameras caught the moment, broadcasting the final frame. Outside, Jackson fell to his knees before the building. Tanya and Rhonda vanished. He cried, not for loss or vengeance, but for the mother he betrayed. Ellie got into a waiting car. She watched through tinted glass as the scene collapsed, a man broken by pride, a family undone. She felt her bones ache, not from age, but from the burden lifted. At night, she lay in bed. She opened the red notebook and wrote her final entry. I demanded justice, not vengeance. I forgive, but do not forget. May he rebuild from truth, not illusion. The final face-off was over. The witness had spoken, and in the silence that followed, she felt peace. Ellie's bedroom was dim, lit only by a small bedside lamp. Her body felt fragile, like old parchment, but her mind was clear. She sat upright, propped against pillows, the red notebook and a final white envelope resting in her lap. Tonight she would write the letter she had held in silence for months. She opened the envelope, blank sheets inside. She pulled out her fountain pen, its nib aging, ink nearly dry, but tonight it flowed anew. She inhaled deeply, steadying her hand. Her thoughts returned to every chapter of betrayal. Jackson's betrayal. Tanya and Rhonda's arrogance, the forged signatures, the stolen savings, the Rome posts boasting luxury. But she focused not on blame, but on truth. Her voice in ink would carry both sorrow and strength. She wrote, My dearest Jackson, you were the rallying cry in my prayers, the pulse in my early mornings, the purpose of every sacrifice. I gave you my all. Time, tears, hope. Yet somewhere along the line, you forgot that what I offered was never a loan, never a debt, but love without guarantee. You took everything I had, my savings, my trust, my identity. You built a life off the bones of my sacrifice. And for that, yes, you will pay. But beyond restitution. This letter is not for vengeance. It is for reckoning. So you cannot say you were never warned. Live with what you did. Recognize your choices. Rebuild from your mistakes. If you repent, do it daily, not for me, but for yourself. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry hate. I love you always, but I cannot be your victim anymore. Love, Mama. Tears stained the margins. Her hand trembled as she folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. She placed the white envelope inside the red notebook on the last page, sealing it with a simple crease. She set it aside and closed her eyes. She felt a strange calm. the calm of one who has released the weight of grievance. She whispered to herself, "This is my final offering. Let it be enough." Morning arrived with gray light. Ellie rose, dressed in her soft teal sweater and clean slacks, and walked to her front porch. She saw the neighborhood children playing, the usual rhythms of life around her. But today she felt apart, serene, detached, empowered. She carried the red notebook and envelope down the steps. The neighbors paused to wave, little whispers at a distance. She greeted them politely. She walked steadily to the mailbox at the curb and dropped the white envelope addressed to Jackson. No stamp, no fanfare, just a quiet act of closure. She retreated to her house, sank into her recliner, picked up her tea, and stared into space. Hours passed. Afternoon light softened. She drifted into memories. Jackson as a boy, his laughter, his tears, his hugs. She remembered telling him, "I don't need a house, just don't forget me." How naive those words now felt. Her mind drifted to Walter and Brenda. She felt gratitude. She felt lessons learned. She felt the certainty that although she would never reclaim the intimate trust she lost, she had reclaimed her dignity. She had stood firm. She had made him see. Evening came. The front doorbell rang. She rose, slow but steady, and opened the door. Jackson stood there, envelope in hand, eyes reddened, silent. Tanya and Rhonda absent. He looked at her with dread, shame, longing. She didn't smile, didn't step forward. She watched him. He said nothing. His presence alone said everything: regret, remorse, heartbreak. He held out the envelope. "Mama, I found this." She took it silently. He choked out, I don't know where to start. I'm sorry." Ellie met his gaze. "Then start here," she whispered. "Live honestly. Rebuild your life with respect. Don't ask me for mercy. Earn it with action." He nodded. He looked down. The red notebook lay open on a small table between them, its pages visible, her logs, her evidence, her heart. He stepped forward, hesitated, then touched his fingertips to its edge. A tear escaped down his cheek. He pulled back. She remained still. He said, "Mama, I don't expect forgiveness, but thank you for not giving up on me entirely." She nodded once. She said calmly, "Then live with what you did. Don't erase my pain. Let it teach you empathy." Then she turned and walked inside. He didn't follow. He stood on the porch a while, alone. Inside, Ellie closed the door. She leaned back against it. In her living room, she sat by the window, watching Jackson stand framed in the doorway, fading into twilight. Night fell. She lit a candle. She drank chamomile tea. She opened her red notebook one more time and wrote in the margin, "I am done with waiting. I am done with silence. I step forward now. Redemption isn't free. It is the final act of love." She closed the book, placed it next to her on the side table. She turned off the light and lay back, breathing slow. Weeks later, Jackson's story made its way into the press. Not sensational, but true. Citizen newsletters, local news, nonprofit blogs picked it up, framing a mother's fight against financial betrayal. Ellie's name became a quiet symbol of dignity and justice. She never sought the spotlight. She accepted messages from strangers who said, "My mother was exploited too. Thank you." She replied with simple words, "You deserve to know you matter." In her final days, Ellie sat on the porch catching the fade of sunset. She held the red notebook on her lap. Jackson never knocked again. He left roses at the porch. She let them wilt and placed them in water, a final gesture of life reaching toward love without asking for it. When Ellie passed, she passed quietly. The neighborhood found her surrounded by the red notebook, the letter, the photos. She wore her teal sweater. She had no grand funeral. She asked for only children's drawings, flowers from nearby gardens, memories. Jackson came. He stood before her body, trembling. He opened the envelope. He read every word aloud in a cracked whisper. He knelt. tears flowing. He looked at the notebook. He touched her wrinkled hand. He said, "Mama, I will spend every breath making your lesson count." The world watched, a son humbled, a mother's voice enduring beyond death. The closure wasn't perfect. There was no magical reconciliation, but there was truth. There was finality, and there was love. The last letter closed one chapter. Ellie's legacy began another, not of wealth or possessions, but of courage. Redemption had been earned. Ellie's death was quiet. No public spectacle, no final drama. She slipped away in her sleep, leaving behind a house heavy with memories, a red notebook lying open on her lap, and a single letter addressed to Jackson on the table beside her. The sunlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing like whispered blessings. For the first time, the home felt still and complete. Jackson arrived early next morning, carrying the weight of years in his shoulders. He walked through the front door, the scent of the house, old wood, worn fabric, mothballed kitchens, hit him like a wave. He knelt beside her body. No words came. He touched her hand, cold, but the weight of what she'd done echoed in his heart. He picked up the letter. The red notebook lay open beside it. He fumbled, touched photos, surveillance receipts, financial logs, her final pleas. He read that last letter she wrote, not as a beggar, not as a victim, but as a mother who chose truth over silence. He wept, not from guilt, from reckoning. Days later, Jackson, no longer the man in luxury, returned alone to Ellie's house. He moved softly in hallways where he once roared. He saw her rocking chair by the window. He sat there, trembling. He found her recipes in the kitchen, her prayer notebook in her drawer, faded but intact. He touched her apron she wore when she cooked his meals, as if seeking solace in cloth. He stayed. He met with neighbors. He listened to stories of Ellie's quiet resistance, of her dignity, of her refusal to fade without being heard. He donated part of the settlement money to an elder care fund. He visited nonprofit organizations, helping women financially abused, and shared his mother's story, not for fame, but to warn. Years passed. Jackson rebuilt a different life, simple, humble. He lived in Ellie's old neighborhood, restored the house, treated neighbors with kindness, earned trust before asking forgiveness. He volunteered at the church Ellie once quietly served. He mentored youth in financial literacy. He never erased what he'd done. He owned it. In the evenings, he would sit in her chair, red notebook in hand. Sometimes he prayed. Sometimes he wrote new pages, continuations of her legacy. He never replaced her. He didn't try. He honored her by walking in truth. Underneath her small garden, the red notebook and letter remained. Jackson visited them. He still leaves fresh roses, and sometimes a note, "I'm becoming the man who knows what cost love must pay." In local newspapers and social media, her story became whispered legend. The silent mother who reclaimed dignity without violence, whose revenge was measured, whose redemption was gift. Children nearby told classmates about her. Elderly women nodded in quiet solidarity. Survivors of betrayal wrote to Jackson, "Your mother's fight saved me from losing my own voice." One quiet morning, Jackson went to her gravestone. He placed a single photo of them when he was 8. He knelt. He said softly, "I failed you, but I will honor you." He stood, looked back at the house she built, and walked away. No turning. Redemption doesn't erase the past. It demands to be lived. Ellie's life had ended, but her purpose lived on in a son broken and remade, in a neighborhood changed, in voices that once whispered now spoke. Her silence had become a roar. Her legacy, a testament that true strength lies not in what is taken, but what is reclaimed with integrity. They say revenge is a dish, best served cold. But in her case, it was served with dignity, strength, and truth. He stole her money, flaunted his betrayal, and crossed oceans thinking he had won. But he didn't realize she had already become the architect of his unraveling. This wasn't vengeance. It was a mother's stand, a silent battle won through clarity, courage, and love that refuses to shrink. If this story made your blood boil, your heart ache, or inspired you to reclaim your voice, tell me below. And remember, when someone takes your worth, quiet strength can be the fiercest form of justice. Thank you for watching. If this touched you, hit like, subscribe, and we'll meet again in the next life-changing story.